The conversation Blitz, Fizz, and Striker share in Oops is one of the most pivotal moments in Helluva Boss, shedding a light not only on the difference between their mindsets, but the cause they all share in common. If you're here, chances are you're at least somewhat familiar with Hell's caste system. To an extent, it's based on power, as well as the amount of territory a demon owns. However, what's immediately relevant to the topic of this video is that it's heavily dictated by species. All you really need to be aware of is that Hell's royalty reigns above everyone else in the hierarchy, while imps as well as hellhounds are below every other species at the very bottom, essentially acting as Hell's equivalent to the working class. In this video, I'll be comparing how the caste system has affected each of the aforementioned characters, starting with, you guessed it, Blitz. Even in earlier episodes, Helluva Boss wasn't shy about letting us know Blitz had clear hang-ups about his relationship to Stolitz. Although he was fine with being flirty and even downright perverted towards other characters, he would mostly treat Stolitz's advances as a nuisance, seeming disgusted by his dirty talk in Murder Family, and even threatening Stolitz not to touch him in Lululand, which was weird given that they were already banging. Blitz's disdain for the poor owl seems to have subsided at least a little bit by the Harvest Moon Festival, though he is visibly frustrated by his condescension, which will certainly tie into later points made in this video. Things end up taking a turn for the worse though, as Hell's sexiest cowboy enters the scene. And trust me, we'll definitely be getting to him later too, but what's most important to note for now is that Blitz seems to be genuinely conflicted by his proposal. As a brief refresher, he tells Blitz the two of them are better than most of their kind, and that he should betray Stolitz and join him in taking down overlords.
Starting with the one that treats you like a plaything.
Ooh, that's kinda hot.
Now, let me be clear, I don't think that Blitz would actually hurt Stolitz when it comes down to it. That said, I absolutely believe being told he's better than taking orders from a prince who treats him like a plaything genuinely got to him. While you could perhaps take it that he's merely acting in order to lower Striker's guard here, the scene isn't really framed that way in the slightest. The background getting dark, the palette changing, the echoing of his words, these things are non-diegetic to the scene. Blitz can't fake that, as this is the show communicating that the character is going through something mentally. Not to mention, why would he show up in Blitz's hallucination next episode, taunting him about how he doesn't want to do things alone, clearly in reference to his partnership offer, if he wasn't genuinely affected by what happened? Let's move on and talk about that next episode, as we get an even bigger clue as to what's up between them with the Truth Gas hallucination sequence in Truth Seekers. As explicitly stated throughout, the general message here is that Blitz suffers with a hedgehog's dilemma. He craves intimacy, yet doesn't allow himself to get too close as he fears getting too attached and having his feelings hurt. A vicious cycle and a pattern with all of his closest relationships. However, it's the final segment of the sequence, the one most relevant to this video, that would suggest an extra barrier is involved when it comes to Stolitz. As I see it, the holy imagery would represent Blitz's belief that Stolitz is unattainable in some way, seeing as demons aren't allowed into heaven, almost literally putting him on a pedestal. Meanwhile, the especially regal-looking throne he's sitting upon probably just comes from Blitz seeing him as a pompous prince. The shackles could quite literally represent how he feels shackled to the relationship in some way, which, given their arrangements, he kind of is. But at the same time, some part of him must desire it, as he initially crawls closer of his own accord. As for why he's then pulled in by the collar, this seems like an allusion to pet play, being a manifestation of not only their BDSM dynamic in bed, but feeling as if he's being treated like a pet, which is valid with the condescending way that Stolitz talks to him. We know that makes him uncomfortable. Now, the finer details may or may not be off here, and feel free to share your interpretation in the comments. But the main takeaway, which I hope we can agree on here, is that he does like Stolitz, but the power imbalance that he perceives makes him apprehensive about doing anything about it, made even worse by his fear of people getting too close to him. At the end of the episode, Blitz shockingly makes the first move on Stolitz, and while yes, you can certainly take it as proof there are feelings there, I don't think there was any real doubt, especially after earlier. I believe this was Blitz being spooked by the hallucination, and re-establishing the relationship as a purely sexual thing, because if he starts acknowledging his feelings as romantic, there's no safety buffer preventing him from getting hurt if Stolitz truly does see him as just a plaything, and this would come into play once again in Aussies. A big focus on Blitz with this one is Fizz and Veronica reminding him of how toxic he's been, and how he's fucked up all of his past relationships. But what may have slipped under the radar for some is that this isn't the only thing that he was upset about. Think about the argument at the end of the the episode. If it was the only thing, he probably would have blamed himself and said they couldn't work because he's a fuck-up. Instead, he gets mad at Stolitz for pretending that what they have is anything more than just sex, something he accuses him of making clear all the time, having taken such a sex-focused approach towards Blitz, at times almost objectifying him and even fetishizing his imphood. Him believing this wouldn't be entirely unfounded. My personal theory is that Stolitz had believed that's what he wanted, perhaps after the initial advance we saw Blitz make in an attempt to gain access to the grimoire in the episode The Circus, and his continued willingness to keep up their arrangement. Any resistance was likely dismissed as playing hard to get or him being embarrassed, and this miscommunication was likely only further enforced by Blitz's refusal to open up to him emotionally, upholding this strict focus on sex himself. And honestly, it kind of does just seem like Stolitz's way of showing affection is to coddle Blitz, which could certainly make one feel like they're being condescended to and treated like a pet. But I digress. What is unfounded is the way in which he thinks that the date didn't mean anything, despite everything pointing towards the contrary. And during that scene from Oops I'd mentioned in the beginning of this video, we finally learn why. Blitz is adamant to Fizz that Stolitz has no real interest in him, despite acknowledging all of the things that would suggest otherwise, cynically seeing any kindness he shows as an act, and callously referring to him as some blue blood arsehole and fake privileged arsehole. Fizz says it sounds like he just has a problem with the fact he's a prince, and he hit the nail on the head with that one. This was the missing puzzle piece all along. He wasn't just scared Stolitz saw him as a sex object from the way he treated him, he thought that as an imp, Royal could never have real feelings for him. But does he truly believe this about Stolitz deep down? From his sympathy for him in the circus, to his romantic gesture in seeing stars, and even to his feeble attempt at showing that he cares in Western energy, he obviously must think better of him. This isn't the tone of somebody with full conviction in what they're saying, but rather somebody trying to convince themselves something is true. But what he does truly believe deep down is that Stolitz shouldn't care for him. That's why when Stolitz formally confesses his feelings to Blitz in Full Moon, giving to him what can only be described as the ultimate token of his love, Blitz is just in absolute disbelief. Now, Stolitz assumes that it must be because he thinks so little of him, but in fact, the opposite is true. Well, sort of. While this is in part due to his preconceived notions about royals, it's mainly that he thinks that imps are so beneath them. Him of all imps especially. I went into a lot of detail about what I believe accounts for Blitz's self-esteem issues, and the unhealthy way he engages in relationships in a recent-ish video. However, an important detail I neglected to take into consideration was how big of a role being an imp played in that. Growing up in poverty and struggling to break out and achieve his dreams can be directly attributed to being an imp. And let's not discount the inherent lack of self-worth that comes with being one of the least valued members of society. So yeah, Stolitz may have done this amazing thing for him, but Stolitz's true nature was never the real problem here. The real problem is that he's a royal. That's why when Blitz is lobbying his accusations and insults, they're all in relation to his princehood, claiming that he treats him like his butler imp, calling him a pompous rich asshole, and saying that royal fucks like him feel they can do whatever they want all the time. But shouldn't he be seeing the reality at this stage? Well, there's two reasons I believe it wasn't quite enough. The first being that he's still protecting his feelings, and clinging onto that belief stops him from being vulnerable. The second, and probably strongest reason, is that he's not ready to confront the fact he had been rejecting his love needlessly all along, and that's why he's still at it in Apology Tour. Yep, even here, he's still throwing out accusations, claiming that Stolitz likes ploughing people he looks down on. Seemingly, he was even trying to bait Stolitz into validating this idea, which isn't surprising. Again, he's clinging onto that buffer. But what's so interesting about this episode is what happens later on. Blitz finally opens up and tells Stolitz that he doesn't understand how a royal could love an imp, or even how anyone could. This is proof to me that Hell's caste system straight up traumatizes imps, making them believe that they're inherently inadequate in some way. Which leads us to Fizz. Now, Fizz views royals with far more nuance than his ex-BFF. This is very likely because he had the fortune of ending up in the loving, grabby hands of Asmodeus early on, and that's why he's so quick to point out to Blitz that Stolitz has to have cared about him. However, having a more realistic idea of royals doesn't necessarily mean his view of his imphood is any healthier than Blitz's. Fizz obviously has some real insecurities, and I'd hazard a guess they didn't just come about from his injuries from the accident, his rise to stardom, or the abuse he suffered from Mammon, like you might initially assume. You probably know know where I'm going with this. Yes, I think like Blitz, being an imp sent him on this course of low self-esteem. Even as a kid, Fizz was busting his ass at the circus. He must have known that imps don't get much opportunity in this society, and because of that, he completely undervalued himself, letting Mammon do anything he wanted to him. It would also be why he strives for nothing less than absolute perfection, having worked himself to the point of burnout and hiding parts of himself as to not let anyone see the figurative and literal cracks, even Oz. While he may indeed be more understanding of them, I believe he still very much has a warped sense of importance towards the royals. Just take a look at his feelings towards Mammon. He idolized him as a kid, and even after getting to understand his shady character better, he still put him on that pedestal and hero worshipped him. And I mean, he wasn't even hot shit to begin with. Not only did he feel overly indebted for what Mammon has done for him, he believed that if he lost his career, he'd lose everything, including Oz. This fear is entirely irrational as, obviously to us, he'd never abandon his beloved Froggy, but this wasn't as obvious to Fizzarolli. While he is able to accept his love, unlike Blitz with Stolitz, he still can't trust that he's good enough for a royal. He's an imp, and a broken one at that. However, while some imps like Blitz and Fizz may simply choose to accept their sorry fate, others like Striker choose to reject it. When Striker was first introduced, many had assumed his apparent gripe with Stolitz was just a feeble attempt at getting Blitz over to his side. However, that would turn out to be far from the case, as we'd find out in Western Energy, where he goes into great detail about his true feelings towards Blue Bloods. He makes some general statements about royals, which honestly seem pretty accurate to reality, but he does say something that sounds more like a personal anecdote. Specifically, some of us have everything taken away by fuckers like you. Whether or not he actually has been personally victimized by a royal remains yet to be revealed, but it would explain an awful lot about the way he is. Whatever the case may be, he seems not only to detest Blue Bloods, but to have some sense of superiority to them as well. I mean, Blitz describes him as a supremacist at least, and that may be the case to an extent. He views Stolitz's kind as complete filth, one would presume due to how they treat his kind, seeing as that was his main talking point. That said, that wouldn't have much to do with seeing them as inferior. Whatever the reason may be, it leads him to find Blitz and Fizz being so involved with them embarrassing. But here's the thing, isn't Striker at least somewhat warranted in this view? I mean, it is the Blue Bloods who have the power to shape the society, and whether they're good or bad people, collectively they are indeed upholding this corrupt system that keeps imps down. Well, not exactly. You see, while Striker has every right to be angry at them, his path is self-destructive and his methods misguided. More than necessarily believing imps are superior, I personally believe that Striker upholds some sort of a superiority complex. I mean, look at his statue. Bro is clearly overcompensating for something. This is something we can observe in Blitz at the start of his character arc as well. Unlike his, however, which came about more from feeling inadequate in who he is himself, I believe Striker's comes from, in fact, believing imps are inferior. This may sound insane, but hear me out. During his pitch to Blitz, he doesn't say, we don't have to listen to royals because imps are superior. He practically throws imps under the bus and tells Blitz that the two of them are superior to most of their kind, presumably with their kind being imps. If you need any proof of this guy's obsession with being the best, look no further than Striker's song, where he goes into excruciating detail about how great he thinks he is, notably to put down another imp.
With every talent, I'm so much more talented than you.
And that's the thing, I think he hates even being reminded of imps being ranked the lowest in the cast. That's why seeing Mox as some kind of pushover probably would have got to him. Not to mention, he seems far too insecure about what other imps do with Blue Bloods for it not to be pathological. Ditto the way he reacts to Fizz, saying he's deluded for thinking he's superior to anyone. It even explains his entire big bad cowboy image, because it exudes a masculine dominance that is, again, overcompensating for his hang-ups about feeling weak as an imp. As for the specifics of why he has a hang-up about imp weakness, that pretty easily fits into the gripe he has with royals. Whatever they did to him, or what he perceives they've done to him, must have made him feel weak somehow. And here's the thing that probably gets Striker so riled up. Royals are inherently the strongest beings in hell. No matter what he does to keep up, he'll always be physically weaker than them. This being his driving motivation would also account for why he's willing to work with Stella. If her money can get him access to heavenly weaponry, he'll probably completely lose sight of his moral code to acquire that power. He definitely isn't just out to kill royals. Otherwise, he'd probably have killed Stolitz despite Stella calling off the hit. So, yeah, imps are kind of fucked.
See ya!